Yeah, thanks, Virginia. Appreciate you guys having us on today. Yeah, so Jim Dahlby, I lead our industry strategy team and growth strategies. And PowerPlan, for those of you who aren't familiar with PowerPlan, is a software provider and focused on energy and utilities. And we have different products across different types of solutions. So we have tax products, we have accounting products, as well as regulatory products that help with things like rate cases and so forth. And so one of the things that PowerPlan has really been doing is focusing on the understanding, within this XBRL journey that the FERC has been going on for a long time, what are the barriers to success, and then what are the challenges that we see. And so obviously the moving from the FoxPro database and manually keying the data to actually having the ability to use systems and more automated processes is actually creating new opportunities that didn't exist historically. And so really what I want to talk about today is this idea of straight through processing and really this concept of, with the abilities of automation now presented through XBRL, where should you be thinking about those? Obviously, probably the initial thoughts you're having right now are just kind of getting through that first initial day one requirements and getting your queues filed and your initial Form 1 and Form 2 that are going to be required in the first part of next year. But I think as people move forward, they're going to start thinking about what else can I do to expedite these processes. And so if you go to the next slide, what kind of we've seen, and I think this was a statistic from one of the FERC workshops, is the actual entering data into the FoxPro database was only 2% of the process, and 98% of the process was really in the gathering of the data, management of the data, and how do you organize all of that information across multiple different stakeholders, multiple different systems. Some of it's financial in nature, some of it's non-financial, some of it's simple things like names and emails of people that need to be involved. But how do you think about that process, and where are their opportunities? And so the solutions like FERC Pro is providing enables this idea of expediting the filings and compliance requirements, but it also introduces this new idea that I can more easily get the data from source systems into those tools, and then through that automation, reduce the overall effort and cost of complying with the FERC guidance. And so if we go to the next slide, so generally what we found with our PowerPlan customers is almost always there existed steps between the data that somebody was using out of PowerPlan. So for instance, let's say you're filling out your FERC Form 1, page 204 to 207, which PowerPlan may be the source of your fixed assets. There's almost always a step that existed prior to that getting into the FoxPro database. And within that step, there oftentimes was various different activities that might be involved. So if we go to the next slide, always, there was reconciliations is kind of one of the key things. So generally from a compliance perspective, somebody was responsible for bringing in the data from the general ledger, somebody was getting the data from PowerPlan, somebody was kind of reconciling all that information. And then there's also use cases where there's off-system adjustments. So there may be a timing difference, there may be a classification difference, there may be something that from a gap perspective was treated one way, but from a FERC perspective was treated another. And so making sure you had any of those off-system adjustments that were needed. And so as you look at each of the different pages within the filing, you kind of had these different components and different steps. And so what PowerPlans are looking to do is, if I'll go to the next slide, is where can you, kind of remove some of these steps, which is, kind of doing the gathering, where do you have to transform the data? So oftentimes there's been this transformation required because maybe the data exists in either more granularity or less granularity than you need to file for the FERC forms. complete that final reconciliation, do your reviews and approvals, and ultimately then put that into the end source. And so what we're seeing is people are, for this initial filing, they're really continuing with their existing process, and they're kind of changing that last mile. And so, at least that's from our initial assessments, that's really what people have been focused on is, okay, I used to have this FoxPro database, what do I do in the future? And so we go one more slide. As we continue down that process, where is that ability to do more automation? And really that starts to exist when you think about it from an end-to-end process. And so PowerPlan in particular, one of the things that we specialize in is this idea of being able to track things for different purposes. So for instance, I may need to have a different set of books for FERC reporting than I do for my GAAP reporting. And how do I maintain those different books for different purposes? How do I keep those reconciled? How do I manage those things? And then how do I understand what that looks like from a financial perspective, as well as from a regulatory reporting perspective? And how do I keep all of those things organized? And so if you go to the next slide, Hudson, sorry. Keep going one more time here. So really what PowerPlan looks at is, can we put that back into the solution? And so we've actually added workspaces within PowerPlan to help you with those reconciliations, help you with any of those adjustments, continue to maintain those kind of various different ledgers from a FERC and a GAAP perspective. And what that does is it provides this transparency from a reconciliation, adjustment, and kind of data perspective, that now you have all that information readily at your fingertips. And then when you get to the end of that process, that's where this automation then starts to get in, where now you can push a button, that data can easily be exported, can be transformed into the particular format for the various filing tools. So let's say there's a CSV or a spreadsheet template for a system like FERC Pro. Those systems and tools can be used to actually pre-populate those templates, and then those templates can easily be digested, and then from there that XBRL process kicks off, and you can manage all the workflows and so forth there. And then I think one of those things that you see then is, once you have all the information, that's where you start to get into, what else can I do with this information that's available? And I think that's where Hudson's teams are really focused on. In addition to helping with compliance, you now have this kind of huge amount of data that's available that wasn't easily as accessible in the past. I know from personal experience, like a few years back, we tried to do some benchmarking around, page 336 and 337, and it was a very painful process to try to do that benchmarking, right? We had people learning FoxPro and trying to download data and try to pull information from all these different data sets. And it's not easily accessible. It's not easily, you can't easily line it up. And I think that's where Hudson's teams are really kind of this idea that data can then be accessible, and you can pull it across different, entities from this public data source. I think it's going to really change some of the ways people think about this process on a long-term basis. So kind of in closing, I think, compliance is top of mind for everybody. You gotta meet those requirements first. But I think as you start thinking about 2022, I think the question becomes, what's next within this landscape? And I think kind of automation and improving the process on the front end. And then I think, FERC Pro and what you can do with this information and kind of long-term from a business intelligence perspective really creates this new landscape that I think people are, we'll figure out a lot over the next, 12 to 18 months, but it's definitely a new world. And I think we're looking forward to see kind of how that shapes up over the coming months.
Thanks so much, Jim. This is Hudson. I've been advancing the slides in the background, and I'm going to also talk in the foreground. Here is a view of the near future based on what Jim has been describing. We do believe that it's going to be possible in the near future to have PowerPlan automatically produce in a structured format most of the schedules for a FERC Form 1 or a FERC Form 6 or a FERC Form 2 or the quarterly versions of those. This means that we can, as Jim was describing, we can get rid of the Excel step in between PowerPlan and whatever reg tech platform you're using to report to the FERC. Obviously, we hope you're using FERC Pro, but this is not just a conversation about FERC Pro. If PowerPlan produces a structured format of some of the schedules in the form, if PowerPlan produces a CSV file, for instance, it can be automatically ingested, and that can become your XBRL formatted report to the FERC. Again, this can mean that you don't have to deal with Excel. This also gives you some more traceability and visibility. Jim mentioned that PowerPlan is very good at auditing and tracing what each user does on the platform. That's also true of FERC Pro. We can track each change that is made by each user to each schedule and each form. What this means is that if we have this straight through process, you'll be able to figure out what changes were made at every step in the chain in case there are ever any questions. So not only do you get rid of the need to build your schedules of your FERC forms inside Microsoft Excel, you also can see what every team member is doing as they do that work. That's the way things will stand assuming that these projects that we've kicked off are successfully completed in the next 12 months or so. As Jim pointed out, or as Virginia said at the beginning of our conversation this afternoon, we do want to make sure that everybody is able to successfully file an XBRL, and the window has now opened. Last Friday, the FERC stopped accepting all filing, even a mandatory filing in the Microsoft Visual Fox Pro platform, and started requiring every single filing to come in XBRL. So right now, XBRL is your only option. We want to make sure that it works properly, and as you all know, there is an enormous deadline coming up. Every third quarter filing has to come in the XBRL format through one of our platforms no later than December 31st, 2021. But we've begun working with PowerPlan on what the future might be, and we think the immediate future might look more like this: an automatic transition from the ERP to PowerPlan through the existing integrations, and then another automatic transition as PowerPlan exports into a RegTech platform, we hope FERC Pro, and then the filing happens up at the FERC. I've got more to show you because we don't think the process should end with filing. There's more to it. But before I advance to that further future, Jim, I want to hear if you or the PowerPlan team have any further observations on this idea of the initial straight-through process. Any thoughts?
No, I think the other thing that we think about is this idea that can I have a multi-purpose process, right? So if I'm preparing this information for the FERC, is it the same information I'm also preparing for maybe a state regulator, or also for maybe, if it's a transmission asset, maybe it's the same information I'm preparing for a FERC filing. Maybe it's a pipeline and I'm doing a Section 4 or Section 5 filing. How do I kind of minimize the effort around kind of those two things in a simultaneous manner? So then kind of in addition to, this initial thoughts on filing with the FERC, you also may have other dimensions where you're filing similar information or the same information with a state commission or one of the other dimensions of the FERC where you have to file maybe similar but slightly different information. And can you kind of piggyback those two things on top of each other where you're not just doing this work just for the FERC compliance, but you're also using it for all the other stakeholders that need similar information from a kind of a FERC view or a regulatory view.
Speaking of more information, we think the process won't just be straight through, it'll double back on itself. As you know, the FERC Pro platform is the only one that includes business intelligence as well as compliance. We don't just file your FERC form, we also use the information in your FERC form to compare your company with its own past, with its competitors, with its peers, or with anybody else in the industry. And so what we hope to do in the future is to bring our straight-through process back into PowerPlan, extract business intelligence from those FERC forms, and then surface those insights for you. So that, for example, after you file your FERC form, you can see whether it was an outlier in any financial category. You can test its 1,300 different data fields against all of the others filed by everybody else in your industry. Every data field from every schedule, from every FERC form is in our database and can be ingested into those comparisons. We calculate KPIs across the entire regulated energy industry. We look forward to working with PowerPlan on that future. I would love to see if there are questions. If there are any questions, feel free to raise them now. I'm going to spend a minute in awkward silence. If there are no questions, or you can feel free to type them into the chat window. And Virginia, please take a look at the chat window since I'm presenting. And if anybody types questions, feel free to call those out for Jim and me. Okay, moment of awkward silence for questions to be raised.
Hudson, Anand here. A quick question. We did talk about CSV being an option of collecting data from one platform to another. JSON is a relatively new standard which is now being adopted across for data transmissions. Would JSON be an option to generate from PowerPlan and consume it? Because JSON to XBRL conversion is a lot easier and better structured than CSV, as I hear.
Is that a question, Anand?
Yes. Is JSON an option? Yes.
Yeah. So within PowerPlan, we've done different sorts of file formats. JSON is one of those formats. I think as of right now, I think for this particular data set, we don't have it in the JSON format, but I think that's definitely something that's easily, that's definitely feasible and something we can look to in the future. I think part of the questions, we see is helping understand what the value steps are, where is the value in the process, and how to make sure that, overall looking to reduce the cost of that compliance requirement. And then, like in this case, how do you then get that value back in the business intelligence process? And I think that's really the key is, people don't like spending a lot of money on compliance if it's not also helping to drive business value elsewhere in the process.
Agreed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the question, Anand. Thank you, Jim. What other questions do we have? Anything else before we move to a quick technical update?
Okay, I'm going to throw in another question. So typically, some of the questions customers ask in this compliance process is audit trail. How does that transfer from one system to another? Is that something which can be planned for? Could be considered as a engagement between two systems? Is that done as a practice when integrating with other systems? Jim, what is your experience on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, generally what we've seen is that people are going to, validate, the whole package, right? So let's say a system like PowerPlan can help you automate, 20 or 30 pages of the FERC form, and there may still be other pages that are sourced from other data sets, right? Maybe have an operational data set or something else. So ultimately, as you're going through that process, there's the checks and balances both within the platform, like FERC Pro, as well as then, from a business perspective, those processes to finalize those things before that final submission.
Fantastic. All right, our quick technical update has to do with some big news that happened on September 17th. As many of you know, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is not just transforming energy reporting into this new format going forward, they've also gone retro. The FERC decided to migrate the last 10 years of annual and quarterly forms, including yours, from fillable PDFs into the XBRL format. And on September 17th, The FERC published all of that. We call that the decade drop. We're currently ingesting it into the FERC Pro Data Hub. What this means is that we can now go retro on all of your applications. One of the observations that we've made is, and impossible without this data, now surfaced for the first time on the FERC Pro Data Hub in the business intelligence side of our platform, is we're seeing the impact of COVID for the first time. It's now clear, this is what we're processing here is net income. We decided to put Citgo up on this board and then compare Citgo to a peer group of 23 companies. We could also have done this across the entire midstream pipeline industry. We're seeing a drop across the board attributable to COVID. Now, although that is quite understandable, I think anybody would have expected pipeline metrics to go in this direction. We're also finding all the places where each individual energy company might have had some sort of unique trend that did not match the rest of the industry. So, for example, here, you'll notice in 2012, Citgo Pipeline Company stayed flat while the entire rest of the peer group, 23 companies, increased and then went back down. So we don't know why that was. We don't know what happened in the industry that did not apply to Citgo. Maybe it was some differential recovery from the 2009 financial crisis. But this is the kind of trend and the kind of comparison that we're now able to plot for every regulated energy company across the entire industry for the last 10 years, thanks to the first decade drop. We are really eager to deliver the decade drop to all of you, and we're excited to be working with so many of you on implementing the business intelligence side of the FERC Pro platform in order to put this data at your fingertips. We're calculating industry-specific KPIs from this data, and we'll be able to use those to plug into your comparisons and your benchmarking. We're excited to be working on all these projects. Now, this is the end of our presentation for today, but I would like to invite you, if you're not part of our mailing list, we'd be happy to have you join our list of over 3,000 people who receive regular updates on the FERC mandate, invitations to this FERC professionals group gathering, meeting recaps and videos, including the one that we're just completing right now. If you'd like to sign up, just take a look at the chat window. There should be a link in the chat window that allows you to sign up for our mailing list.
Yeah, I just put it in there. So if you want to join the mailing list.
Fantastic. So for those who'd like to sign up, that link is there. And we're excited to share this content with you and other content as we survey the history and, more importantly, the future of the regulated energy industry.